My name is Angie, and this is the story I wasn't supposed to find.
And I'm our sister, Cindy. We started this podcast with one name, Stella Smith, our great-grandmother, a woman who gave up 2 daughters, disappeared from history, and left behind almost nothing.
No photos, no grave, no explanation, just a blank space where a person should have been.
Until a DNA test changed everything. Turns out, Stella Smith wasn't even her real name.
Her name was Stella Suarez. She came to America from Spain as a child. She married twice, left 2 families, and somehow managed to vanish not once, but twice from history.
In season 1, we found Estrella's beginnings in America. We found family we didn't know existed. We sat across a table from cousins who'd been looking for the same woman we had from the other direction. And we thought we were closing a chapter.
We were wrong.
Because season 2 is where things get even more complicated and even more personal. New relatives surface, new documents turn up, and some of the answers we finally found led to questions we'd never thought to ask.
This is Buried Threads, a podcast about family secrets, silence, reinvention, and what happens when the past refuses to stay buried.
We want to begin with a recap of our story so far. If you've been listening to season 1, you know that our grandmother was adopted. And after she passed, we found out she had been searching for her birth mother, our great-grandmother. We knew that Stella Smith married Christopher DeBoard in 1925 in Springfield, Illinois, and she had 2 daughters, Florence, who was born in 1926, and Marie Christine, who was born in 1928.
They were no longer together by late 1928, and by this time, Florence and Marie were both in foster care. Marie would be adopted in 1932 from foster care, and then grew up and lived her whole life around Macomb, Illinois. But she always was plagued by missing her birth family.
Yeah. And Florence would grow up in foster care pretty much her whole life until she was, I think, 17 and a half, apparently having contact off and on with Christopher. She was married and moved away from Illinois, passed away when she was still relatively young, but she and her husband did not have any children. Her husband's name was Theodore Knoll.
Yep. When she passed away, they lived in Arizona. They had been in Springfield kind of for the first half of their life. And then he was a builder. And so they moved out to Arizona where he was kind of part of the, building subdivisions in the 1960s kind of thing. She worked for the hospital out there and she died. I want to say she's like her late 50s. So pretty young.
Yeah. And then our mom took a DNA test, and through that DNA test, after a couple decades of you researching, Angie, we were finally able to find out more about our great-grandmother. And we were able to find her roots, Stella's roots, through a cousin named Paul, a first cousin to our mom named Paul. And we found her name is actually Estrella Suarez. She immigrated from Spain as a young child. She was raised here in the U.S. by an uncle named Manuel and his first wife, and his wife. And then later his wife passed away, so his second wife in St. Louis.
Then they moved to Taylor Springs. She lived her kind of upper childhood there. She got married to Emilio Valdez at age 15, and then she had her first child at 16. Her name was Mary Rose. We later discovered that Mary Rose was actually a twin, and that there had been a stillborn baby boy named Joe that was born at the same time.
And then about a year later, according to the family, Estrella disappeared in the night, leaving behind her husband and baby girl. And the family, according to them, never knew what happened to her and never saw her again. But we know that she showed up in Springfield, Illinois, and married Christopher. But after giving the girls up, she worked at the residence of Etta Montgomery, until the final record that we have, which is in 1937, a city directory.
We lost track of Stella after that last record. So the last time we show her on documents were 1937, the city directory. And after that, we just could find nothing whatsoever.
And while Christopher shows up in a lot of different places, we always talk about him being a wanderer, and he shows up in and out of Florence's life, shows up where there's family, but we really don't have any official record of Christopher much after their divorce. in 1944 was finalized. The family has him showing up maybe in the 50s. Florence makes some acknowledgement of him, but really there's no official record. It was certainly from the 50s on of where he landed, or even where he's buried at this time. So that just brings
Listen,
you up to date. Go
listen,
ahead.
this is my theory on Christopher. This is
Okay,
my
let's
theory
hear it.
on Christopher. So we already know he was documented as a con artist, that he used multiple aliases with the military, in those 30s and 40s. My theory is the reason we can't find anything for him after is that after that investigation was done and they figured out who he was, I think he was using a different identity after that. And so, wherever he lived, his later years would have been under a different name. Because here's the thing, by late 1940s, early 1950s, he would have been required to have Social Security. And we know he was alive, but what we don't have is the record that he ever, there is no Social Security record for him. So, either he was living a real under the radar life or he was using a different name.
And I think his family is really going to help us to be able to run some of those things down. And family is a good marker for him because he always shows up where there's family. So we're going to keep hunting him down. Maybe there will be some additional DNA match in the future that might connect us with some other life that Christopher had. We've been surprised before. We might be surprised again. So that's where we've left them in season 1. But if you really are interested in knowing more of the details, we acknowledge, though this is our story, it is kind of a wild story. So we highly recommend going back and listening to season 1 of Buried Threads, reviewing some of the artifacts that we've posted on Substack and Facebook. There's a lot there to see, and there's a lot of documentation. And listening to the previous episodes will help you to understand the details of how we found out this information and much more than what we're able to share in a recap today. But we do think it's important to just stop for a second and talk about where we are in our story and how we kind of got here. Angie has been researching our family genealogy, specifically our great grandmother, taking up our grandmother's search for over 2 decades. A DNA test did make a real difference in the last, 6 years now, 5,
Yes.
6 years. But we decided that we wanted to document this story. We felt like people would want to hear that they might be interested in the journey that we've been on and also what we've discovered. Plus, it's just kind of a wild story. Not only the story of our great grandmother, but also how we're discovering it and how it's bringing together, how it brought us together with Paul and Estrella's family through her first daughter. So it's pretty great. And we've really enjoyed sharing it, and people seem to be enjoying hearing it. So when we got together and decided to make this podcast, we really we literally had no clue what we were doing, right, Angie? Like we put
And
a
we had
map.
25 years of research trying to unpack.
Right, to try to tell this story. And we still had a lot of questions. And so we each took a week of vacation and we went and we met with Paul and his family and we visited graves. And then we went to a borrowed recording studio and we sat down and in one sitting, really, we recorded the entire season 1. We probably could have done many more episodes because you just had that much information after that much research. So we recorded all of it and we had this grand plan of like, we're going to do this podcast, we're going to record it. But you know what we didn't really plan for is when and how are we going to publish this, right? So that was the end of summer. That was like literally the last week of July in 2025 that we recorded season 1 together. It was great. It was wonderful to tell the story. But without a plan for when we were going to release it, life happened and there was a pause of sorts, right? And where editing
And
was
the edits
happening.
took longer than we thought they would take.
Yeah, I mean, everything. And so we entered into 2026 and some things happened. Some information was revealed, new things were discovered, new people. And all of a sudden, we had much more story to tell, right?
Yes.
But we needed to release that season 1 first.
Yes. So I woke up one morning to an email that just changed the story, turned it up on its end. And very exciting time. But the very first thing that we said is, oh my gosh, we have got to release season 1 so that we can talk about season 2 like in real time.
Correct. So while we've been releasing the episodes that we recorded for season 1, we have also continued researching, having conversations. Angie emails and texts like crazy. We have been following up and we have been discovering so much. And, this is we know we're not experts. We're not expert podcasters. We're not genealogical experts or DNA experts. We're just trying to find our story. And so that becomes the end goal. So we do wonder, we suppose, we imagine, we show grace, we try not to judge because this is our story and we're just trying to figure it out, right? So,
Yes.
and to carry it forward in our own, not only our own story, but our children and their children. And from this moment forward, this is now our story. And so now, here we are. So I know season 1 just finished publishing, and here we are recording season 2 because we have so much more to share. Season 2 might not ever end. It won't end until we're out of discoveries, right? And people to talk about. But so that's how we've gotten here.
Season 2 is just going to be much more in real time, because again, season 1 is all about all the research and how we laid it out and tried to retell the story in the same layers that we learned it the best that we could. Where season 2 is going to be just sharing things, as we know them, as we see them, and it's gonna be a lot of fun.
So we have new connections. We have brand new information. We have new threads to pull. That's given us new leads. We want to be interviewing some people. We want to bring other people in on the conversation. So not only are we learning from all these new people, but our listeners get to hear from them as well. We think that's a real wonderful treat. So we have so much to cover. But while we're doing this, we are still uncovering more. Like we don't
Yeah.
know the end of the story because we're still figuring it out. And so it's pretty exciting. As we've been going through everything and doing research and hearing from new people, we have looked at documents that have existed that we've had in our possession for a long time or documents that are newer. We've looked at them a million times, but we've been going back and looking at them again. And now you mentioned this, Angie, we're familiar with things. We have new context. And so sometimes we're looking at things and we're like, oh, we got that wrong. Or we're just noticing things we never noticed before in these documents.
I feel like the new knowledge gives us new insight to understand why a certain word is important or not important. Just as a very quick little teaser, there's a letter, we shared it in episode 1, that the adoption agency wrote to the adoptive family, just kind of giving a summary, of my grandmother before she was adopted. We talked about it before. We've read this. I've had this for 25 years. I've read it 1,000 times. And in a recent review, someone who'd never seen it before looked at it and said, why is the worker who wrote this letter, why did she sign it from Galesburg? And I'm like, that's a really good question. Galesburg had nothing to do with our story, so we thought. But actually, that ended up being a really big clue. And so it was just that kind of thing, little details, that her signature and how she signed it didn't seem like such a big deal. But all of a sudden, now it really is a big deal.
Exactly. So let's talk about some of the things that we reviewed, some of the artifacts that we talked about and even shared on social media or otherwise in season 1 that maybe we pulled out new things or just looked at new context. And I can start with one. You talked about Galesburg. So when we were reading the letter from the Illinois Children's Home and Aid Society, it was written in March of 1932 to the Hickmans. And it was regarding the parental rights of Christopher being posted. Well, it was regarding his parental rights. They were kind of informing the Hickmans of the process that would take place. First, the parental rights would have to be terminated. Then the Illinois Children's Home and Aid Society would receive guardianship. And this is of Marie Christine specifically. They only wrote to the Hickmans about Marie Christine. There's no mention of Florence. And so they were saying, like, once the parental rights are terminated, we'll take guardianship and then we can begin the adoption process. So they're explaining this to Nellie and Noah Hickman, who will adopt Marie Christine. And so the notice for Christopher's parental rights to be terminated, because clearly the courts didn't know where he was, so they posted it in the paper. That was posted in the newspaper in March of 1932, and we've shared that notice. So they're explaining all of this and saying, like, hey, in April there will be a trial, the rights will be terminated, and then we can begin this process. So interestingly, the letter refers to Mary, which we know as Marie Christine, sort of the anglicized version of her name. But we also know that it refers to the worker who has Mary, right? And we thought that Marie Christine went into foster care early, or I'm sorry, went into foster care early on, like maybe even as an infant. And we assumed that she was placed with the Hickmans because we knew she was with the Hickmans prior to being adopted. I don't even know how we knew that, but we knew that. But in March of 1932, when this letter was sent, she in fact was not with the Hickmans. And so
And
we
she
were
would have been
like,
four.
wait,
She would have been 4 years old.
she would have been 4 years old. So we're like,
So
wait
there's
a minute.
lots of questions. What was happening from 0 to 4?
Yeah,
What did that part of her life look like?
yeah. And we didn't even catch that in the letter originally, but we're like, hold on a second. Where is she? Who is the worker who had her? And, I mean, there's a big difference between, was she in a children's home? Was she placed with another family? It's very interesting. It just alludes to that. And then we're left with that question. So then you talked about also it coming from Galesburg, not Sangamon County.
Well,
And
here's what's interesting about that, just as a reminder before you jump into the
yeah,
importance of that. You remember that I tried to get her adoption records unsealed from Sangamon County, and I got a judge to sign the order saying that it would be unsealed, except that when they went to pull the record, they could find no adoption record for Sangamon County. And I was talking to the clerk, and we couldn't, figure this out, and we determined that she must have been adopted in another county. And then we had no idea where. Well, so now, of course, Galesburg is saying, well, why would there be a worker from Galesburg communicating about this information from her? Right? Like Galesburg is a smaller town than Springfield. So the Galesburg is not going to be like a regional supervisor over somebody in Springfield. What that really then points to is if there was a worker in Galesburg, she must have been in Galesburg, which we never knew. We never made a connection that she might have spent time in Galesburg.
and in that, I can't remember what county Galesburg is in.
Knox County?
Knox County. That sounds right. Yeah. Which isn't even the same county that the Hickmans lived in.
Correct.
They had a farm. So they were near Colchester, which is south of Macomb.
Yeah, it was McDonough County, I believe.
McDonough County. Yeah. So it's not even the same. So we have 3 different counties involved, which is curious. And it's worth asking that question. I'm really glad somebody pointed that out. Well, and the other thing is we do have a copy of the newspaper. Our mom has loved scrapbooking. And so she scrapbooked these family histories as we knew them at the time. And she sent me the digital files. I had them on an extended drive somewhere, external drive, like a flash drive or something. And at some point I had put them all together and I just hadn't gone through them file by file. But when I did, there was one that had a letter and then it had this little clipping on the side. And I opened it and it was the adoption notice for Marie Christine. Now, in the letter that they sent to the Hickmans, they said, basically everything, the reason Illinois Children's Home and Aid Society would get guardianship and then the adoption process would take place would be so that the parents couldn't know or have any contact. Everything would be confidential, which is very interesting because we always talk about how everything's posted in the newspaper, including Marie Christine's adoption with her birth name and her new name and her parents. But
And the city.
yeah, exactly. And where she was. So we were looking back at that and we realized some things that we just hadn't realized before. One is it was posted in 1934. So that she's born in 1928. This is 1934. And it says that Marie Christine was adopted by the Hickmans. That means the adoption we assumed was finalized when Christopher's parental rights were terminated. And that is not true. It actually wasn't finalized until 1934. She would have been 6 years old.
6.
So now it also says that, so she was adopted by the Hickmans in 1934 when she was 6 years old. It says she was 6 years old and that she had been with them for 2 years.
Right.
So we know that probably from when Christopher's parental rights were terminated until the adoption, well, and then beyond, she was with the Hickmans. But we just didn't realize that the adoption took place when she was 6. So we're not talking about a toddler at the point of adoption.
Correct. And I think this is going to bring up some really important questions that we just need to point out and then tuck away for future analysis and future discussion. And that is, first of all, what was going on where was she and what was going on from 0 to 4?
Big question.
Right? Don't believe that she was still with Estrella during that time because Estrella was already living as a live-in maid in Springfield. So it seems unlikely that she would have been with her. But where was she? Was this a disrupted adoption? Was she starting with somebody else and then that changed over? That happens sometimes, right? Or was she in a children's home? Or like, who knows what the reasons are? But there's a lot of life that would have directly impacted our grandmother from that 0 to 4 that we realize we know nothing about. And the second thing that becomes important of that is the statement in there about how they were doing this to protect the family so that the parents could never find them. That's a little interesting, right? Like that doesn't appear, I'm not an expert, but it doesn't appear that that's the typical language used always in adoption things. So then it's like, why did they feel the need to have that protection? It makes you wonder if it was an involuntary, if that's the reason why they needed to, that it was taken away without parental consent, right? That it was not an optional thing. Or, we talked about Christopher kind of looping in and out often before. Was he doing some of that in those early years? No idea, but it gives pause to wonder, why did they feel the need to say that? And I think that becomes important later.
Yeah, for sure. But of course, I think we can probably guess that it was a mistake. However, if it was supposed to be confidential, then why in the world was it in the newspaper?
Yeah.
Because again, her name changed, the parents' name, like everything. The one thing that isn't indicated there is where the adoption took place, because it is just a little newspaper clipping. And I don't have the physical copy. I just have like a digital picture. So there's no indicator. It does have a judge's name, and it has I think a lawyer's name or a
It does have the
petitioner.
attorney's name, yeah.
And of course, it says the township that the Hickmans live in, and it refers to parental rights being terminated in Sangamon County, which my deduction then is that did not take place. The adoption did not take place in Sangamon County. It'd be kind of like referring to yourself in first person, but I don't really know. So there's a lot to chase down there regarding the adoption.
Galesburg, here we come.
Yeah, exactly. And then two other notes. These are just interesting things. That famous summary of the family history that we talked about in season 1, as told by Estrella. There's also a cover letter with it that is basically stating that the summary was created by a caseworker at the Illinois Children's Home and Aid Society, and it was sent to Mrs. Noah Hickman. So, of course, it was sent to Nellie, but it was also sent at her request. And I thought that was interesting. And then the other interesting thing is that it was dated 1935. So it would have been 35?
Oh, 35.
1 year after the adoption was finalized. So
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. So that means Nellie requested the family history and then they sent it to her. But theoretically, she would have been living with them at least 3 years at the time that this was received. And
That's
the
a really
Illinois
big
Children's
deal.
Home and Aid. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a really big deal to make that request. Again, I know from my personal experience with adoptions, once an adoption is finalized, once they bang the gavel and, make it official and they legally sever you, like it's as if that didn't exist anymore. They regenerate birth certificates now with the new parents' names on it, all those things. And those records are sealed. And so it's not, I can't say that a judge had to unseal this, but I know in my case, like I was not able to get records for my kids from after that gavel without a judge order. So the point is that it wouldn't have been just, I'm kind of curious, can you just send me a note, right? Like there had to be some meat to this request. And who knows what that is, right? Was she having some behaviors and maybe they were trying to dig into the past and see if there's more information that, will be helpful to them. Who knows? That's total speculation, right? But there had to be a significant reason to make that request because the records were sealed by that point.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. And the one other thing was there was an additional handwritten letter, which I thought was really interesting. It's on the Illinois Children's Home and Aid Society letterhead, but it's from that same caseworker. Now, this was before the adoption was finalized, but it's just stating that this person went to Marie Christine's school and talked with her teacher and observed her there. She calls her precious and says she's just a lovely, smart child. She also said she never interacted with Marie directly. She just observed her and then talked to the teacher, which I thought was interesting. But she also referred to her as Norma Jean, which is just a little clue, but this is before the adoption's been finalized and before her name was legally changed.
Yeah.
So all that tells me then is probably for the whole time she was with the Hickmans, at least she went by Norma Jean.
Yeah.
Which is it's just good to know. So it would have been from roughly four on. But I thought that was interesting as well. Just it kind of adds little, bits and pieces to the story from Marie Christine.
It begs the same question of Florence.
Yeah.
So when did she enter foster care with the Redburns? Why wasn't she adopted? And, we're kind of reevaluating some of our early opinions on that. So, like, we don't have any official foster care records. So the reason we say that she was in foster care, first, we knew that Marie Christine was, so it just seemed logical that Florence must have been also. But also on the census for the Redburns, it labels her as a boarder and other children as a boarder. And according to my research, that is typically how foster children were identified on a census. And then, of course, in some of the later documents, Florence refers to, like on her first marriage announcement, she refers to Della as her foster mother. But what we don't know, like, is that was that a technical name, right? Was it truly a foster parent? Is it somebody that there's other scenarios we played with. We don't know if it's true or not true or whatever. Because Christopher shows up with that family. Is it, did Christopher have Florence and then he left him with someone to take care of, or was it a true foster care situation? We just don't know.
Yeah. And we do know that foster care the whole adoption process was sort of being reevaluated at this time and restructured, and foster care specifically was being changed. And they were trying to move away from orphanages, that sort of setting of an orphanage, and move to children being placed in homes. And that's kind of where the foster care system came from. But it was in its infancy. And we've heard and we've read that it was pretty inconsistent in this time period because of that. And like, as they're figuring things out. So it's difficult to say, but often, and I think this is still true today to some degree, but a foster home could be an official foster home, but it could be a relative of the child, or it could be a family friend of sorts.
Right.
And really that is still true today and to some degree.
Yes.
But
so we don't that's involved today, but
yeah, we don't have any record of the Redbirds being relatives, at least in the family information that we have for Christopher or whatever. But we do wonder about that because Christopher keeps showing up there and they keep letting him. So interesting. It's an interesting dynamic that we just have lots of questions about. It would be incredible to find out if there are foster care records for Florence.
Right. Yeah. And also just as a very little tack on to what you said that very well, but also keep in mind that Springfield is the state capital. So when the state is determining their new, like, what's foster care going to look like Springfield would have been in the heart of what that change looks like and reflecting that, because it was literally the center of where these things were happening.
Yeah. We also noticed in the divorce decree, now some of this is just legal language. So like, how much is what his lawyer is just saying, I'm putting this on paper, this is sort of standard, legalese in order to process this, and how much is truth? With Christopher, there's always a question mark. But one of the things that is determined, or that he declares, let me say it's a declaration in the divorce decree, is that Florence lives with him because he is given full custody of her. I mean, she's like 17 in some months, but she still is a minor, and the state awards him full custody. And he says that she resides with him. So that's interesting, right? And we had those questions like, was she living with Christopher in 1944? Like when the divorce took place, or like when it was finalized, or after? Or was Christopher temporarily staying with the Redburns and, the foster family and just declaring that was true? We don't know the answer, but there is a question of how much did she actually live with Christopher and how much.
Yeah. So it doesn't appear that she ever lived anywhere except for Springfield, right? Like, so if she did go with him for, a time, which there's some evidence that maybe she did, like a little traveling with them, it seemed to have been short-lived, right? Like it was a visit or not long-term. But she was, primarily in Springfield. When she married in Springfield. When her and her husband got married, they lived on the same street as the Redburns, like 5 houses down, which again is very typical during that period. So Springfield really was her home base. It was, was her permanent place. But there is evidence that she did at a minimum travel with him a little bit. It seems like all that started after that first, I can't say first marriage because they didn't get married, but that first attempt at marriage, when her legal position kind of became precarious. Because we said this back in season 1, you can listen to it if you don't remember this, but how would she have even met that soldier to get married when he was from Missouri? Like, it seems like she would have had to have been in Missouri because it was near the places that Christopher was known to be. So it just makes you wonder, was she traveling with him for a little bit? We also know she didn't graduate high school. So, like, again, in those upper teen years, maybe that's the time that she was traveling with him a little bit more. But it does seem that she came back to where she was tethered to, and she did settle in Springfield.
And you just reminded me, we really don't have any record of permanent resident of Christopher really after he and Stella aren't found together anymore. Early on, they're found together, living together earlier in their marriage. But after like 1928 and beyond, they're not listed together. Really, anytime he shows up, it's at somebody else's house. Like as a, like say with the Redburns or whatever, there's no like, this is Christopher's house. There's no address. It's not,
Correct.
permanent
He was
address.
clearly very transient, but I also go back to again, this is my theory. I always try to say what's fact and what's opinion, or this is an opinion comment, but I believe he was living under lots of different aliases. Let me rephrase that differently. All the times that we do see him show up on a record as Christopher DeBoard are when he was trying to manipulate to get services involved with the military, or when he was connected to Florence in some way. And absent from, if it's not connected to military or Florence, there's no record whatsoever. And that makes me wonder, it forms my opinion, that he was already living under multiple identities and he only used the Christopher DeBoard one when it was suiting him. And I think the reason why he was using another identity is because the Christopher DeBoard one had a felony, so it's just my opinion, but I think that's why we can't find anything else, is that he lived under multiple identities. And so wherever he ended up was not in the name of Christopher DeBoard.
And other than family saying he was here at this time or this time, other than that, after that VA investigation was finalized, we don't find Christopher DeBoard anywhere.
Not a scratch. And that's just very odd.
So you're probably right about that. I want to jump back. So that's Florence. I want to jump back to Marie Christine because there was another just interesting thing. It could be a coincidence. But we were, again, thinking about that divorce decree coming out in 1944. And we also know the story. And we don't know exactly how this played out or who this involves, but we know the story that we have been told, I think from our grandfather, was that when grandma was about 15 or 16, she found out that she was adopted. And the story is that someone else told her, maybe an aunt. And she kind of went rebellious, ran away. They went and got her, whatever. But
ran away. She, ran away to Ohio, and they had to hire a private detective to bring her back.
Go get her. Yeah, it was a big deal. But if she was 16, then it would have been the same year of Stella and Chris's divorce. And it's interesting because in this geographic area, you have Springfield, you have Macomb, where she grew up and lived as a teenager. They're two totally separate communities, right? But they're not geographically super far away from each other. And we know everything's in the newspaper. Yeah, we just wondered if that was coincidental, that the same year the notice would have been in the paper about the divorce and all of that is the same year she finds out she's adopted and runs off. It could be a coincidence, but
well, I have a couple comments on this.
Sure.
So the first thing, once we figured out that she didn't come to the Hickmans until she was 4 and adopted at 6, this story didn't make sense anymore because there's memories. By the time you're 4 or 6, I mean, I adopted 2 children at age 5. They are way too old to not have memory that she wasn't always there, right? So it didn't make sense. How would just finding out you're adopted when you're 15 like that? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem to factually line up. And why would it make you so upset? Like, you should have had memories, or it shouldn't be a big surprise. So then it made me wonder, this is a story we've heard, second, third hand. Is there a detail we're missing? Is there another nuance we're not understanding? But it just kind of stuck in my mind as something's not setting right with this. Then you started the process and then of laying together timeline. So we have timelines already built, like all these different people, what's happening in each person's life in all these years, but laying them together into one kind of master's thing and saying, okay, well, if this was happening in 1932 in Christopher's life, what was happening in 1932 in Stella's life and in Marie Christine's life or in Florence's life? Because all these things seem to correlate together. And we started noticing patterns of something happens on somebody else's timeline, and then there's a corresponding behavior on another one. And this is one of those examples, right? So the same year, because the year that grandma was 15, that she supposedly ran away, that was the same year that the newspaper would have published the story about Christopher's and Stella's divorce. And so that became like, now this is interesting. Now, again, here we're going to get into supposing territory, right? But keep in mind, if you did not know anything about the family and you read that divorce notice, it says Christopher, Stella, getting divorced. You would think that they've been together all this time. You wouldn't, the newspaper wouldn't give you a pause to realize that they haven't actually seen each other for 15 years, right? And that Florence is mentioned in there also, that there was another child that stayed there. So then it's like, if you were the other child, our grandmother, looking at that, it would feel like, wait a minute, my mother and my father and my sister stayed together and I wasn't there. Why was that? That's something that could be more hurtful, right? And if you had been told that they were separated this whole time, they were not together, nobody knew where they were or whatever kind of thing, and then all of a sudden you see this, you might think that your parents lied to you because it would seem like things don't line up exactly right. And then it makes me wonder who in the world would have seen this newspaper article and pointed out to her.
Well, and I think this brings up a good point. That's true when we're studying stuff like this. It's true in adoption stories or anybody who has a sort of unusual birth story, finding out their parents aren't who they thought they were, or it's just true in life today. Like when we have gaps in information, we are at risk of filling in the blanks ourselves, right? And you take a 15 or 16-year-old girl who may have these memories and thinks things are one way, and it's very confusing, and it would probably feel like betrayal,
Yep.
to find out what you were told, whatever that wasn't what you thought that it was. May be a coincidence that it lines up with the divorce being
Don't think so.
publicized. Maybe not, it's just interesting.
As we move through season 2, there's more and more of these might be coincidence, and then there's just too many coincidences to be a coincidence. So, and also spoiler alert that when we lay the timelines together from one to the other, we find a lot more interesting things besides just this.
Yes, exactly. Before we finish today, there's 2 more big new information that I want to talk about today before we leave. So when we were reviewing documents and looking online at, family trees and all of that, we actually found something that we previously missed. And we discovered the firstborn child of Manuel and Rosa. Now I say we discovered because actually somebody else discovered before us because we found the information, but it was information we did not have.
And most of the family did not have. Most of the family were
and
not
most
aware
of the
that there was
family
this
did not
person.
know. Exactly. And maybe those who did know had just forgotten. So we wanted to make sure to mention this. Manuel and Rosa, actually, their firstborn child, we thought was Joe, their firstborn child together. But we actually found out that they had a daughter, and her name was Barandina Suarez. And I apologize if I've said that wrong. That's the best I could do with it. But she was born March 13th, 1916, and she died August 17th, 1917. And she was buried, we think, well, it says Catholic Hillsborough, but there's no such, I can't find a cemetery called that. That's what her death certificate says. So I'm wondering, there's a St. Agnes Catholic Church near Hillsborough or in Hillsborough. I'm not sure. Hillsborough, Illinois. So that's something we can chase down someday. I would love to find a grave marker if we can. There's a lot more to tell about this baby girl. Obviously, this was not a birth death. She lived for over a year. So there's more to tell about this and what we think that she may mean to Estrella's story. We're going to talk about that more in depth later. But
It's a really important piece.
it is a really important piece, but we wanted to mention her here because we don't want her to be overlooked. and we don't want her to be forgotten. And if we have anything to say about it, nobody in the family will be unaware of her in the future. But we just think it's really important to say, Berendina was the firstborn child of Manuel and Rosa. She did not live long, but she did live, and we want to make sure that that's known. And as you said, as of late March of this year, 2026, Paul and his family did not know about her at all. Obviously somebody knew, but just something, we've talked about this before. Things aren't talked about. And so we'll cover that more later.
Not only Paul's family, but also Phil's family, which is DNA descended from Manuel and Rosa's other children. So I think it was a dark time and a sad story, and it just wasn't talked about.
So we'll talk more about that later this season. And so the other thing has to do with DNA matches hanging out there. So I'm going to let you remind us about your DNA search and where we kind of gone with it.
Yes. So if you listened last season at all, you heard about the name Ryan, and Ryan was a really important DNA match that we needed to be able to reach out to and connect to, and that we believed would have a lot of information to share with our story. And the reason why I felt like he was important, when we did the DNA analysis, I had 2 DNA matches, Paul and Ryan, that were both equally spaced. So going to be about equal DNA connection to my mom, which puts them at the first cousin range. And also, without going into the complex of do you have it now, you can listen to the last episodes. But the DNA mapping proved that Ryan had to be descended from another child of Estrella that we did not know about. And so we felt like it was going to be a really important match, but his tree was locked down and he wasn't answering my emails. And all throughout the season, I kept talking about Ryan, I need you to open your email. Well, it just so happened it was early February of this year, and I woke up early in the morning to an email from Ryan. And he had finally opened his emails. And when he did, of course, he found a whole slew of emails, both from my account, from my mom's account, because I had been writing on both of them for a long time, hoping that it would eventually get his attention. And he was saying that he never knew these messages were there. He hadn't seen it. But as soon as he saw it, he said, I absolutely want to help figure out how we're connected. And so that is what opened up all that we're going to talk about in season 2.
And the result was huge. Like, yes. Unbelievable, life-changing information pertaining to our story. It's mind-blowing. Like, there's so much to say about it, but we're not going to talk about it until next week.
What I will say is this, I'm not going to give any information away. What I will say about this is this tipped the scale from getting one little clue every so often to now the clues were coming in a waterfall. And so it just it crossed the threshold of learning lots of information in a short period of time that really is exciting to share.
And also, like, as we've been on this journey through season 1, releasing season 1 and listening to the story alongside our listeners and interacting with everyone together as everybody's hearing it, we called out Ryan so many times. But we kept saying, like, we think that this is going to be a major deal, like communicating with this person that they are going to blow this open. We think that this is going to be a game changer. And it was. And he is. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you everybody who reached out and offered to help find him. And it's been such a big deal. And we're going to talk more about this in the future. So hang in there. It's a wild ride. Thanks for listening. If you're walking your own search through DNA, silence, or a name you can't quite place, you're not alone.
If you want to go deeper on this story, you can find us on Substack at buriedthreads.substack.com. That's where we release every episode, along with documents, photos, and the kind of details that don't always make it into the audio.
You can also find and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And if you haven't yet, subscribing or leaving a review makes a real difference in helping other people find us.
For more photos, recap videos, polls, and the occasionally chaotic behind-the-scenes moments, find us on Facebook and Instagram. We're at Buried Threads.
And if something we've shared has stirred something in your own family story, we really do want to hear it. Reach out. You might be surprised where a single thread leads.
Until next time, keep pulling the thread.
Just know